Today we're going to talk about personal protective equipment, or the acronym PPE. OSHA requires employers to protect their employees from workplace hazards through the use of engineering or work practice controls. When these controls are not feasible or do not provide sufficient protection, the use of personal protective equipment is required. Employers must protect employees through the access of the workplace, eliminating and reducing the hazards found using engineering and administrative controls, and then ensuring use of appropriate personal protective equipment. Remember, personal protective equipment is the last level of control. For our objectives, we're going to describe the hierarchy of controls as it relates to the personal protective equipment, identify the types of PPE used in general industry, explain personal protective equipment training requirements, explain the responsibilities the employer have, and the responsibilities the employee have, both regarding personal protective equipment. The hierarchy of control methods is illustrated through the graphic on your screen. It's the effectiveness of the system used to prevent and control hazards. Elimination and substitution are going to provide the highest level of protection against hazards. The hazard is eliminated from the workplace, or a safer item or substance is substituted for the more hazardous item or substance. Engineering controls are the second most effective means of protecting employees from hazards, followed by administrative and work practice controls. PPE is the last resort as it is the least effective. Elimination and substitution is the highest level of protection against hazards. The hazard is eliminated from the workplace, or a safer item or substance is substituted for the more hazardous item or substance. Another type of substitution includes using the same chemical but to use it in a different form. For example, a dry, dusty powder may be a significant inhalation hazard, but if this material can be purchased and used as pellets or crystals, there may be less dust in the air and therefore less exposure. Engineering controls require physical changes to the workplace. Based on the following principle, if feasible, design the facility, equipment, or process to remove the hazard. If removal is not feasible, enclose the hazard to prevent exposure in normal operation. Where complete enclosure is not feasible, establish barriers or local ventilation to reduce exposure to the hazard in normal operations. Some examples are isolation, the hazard is enclosed prohibiting exposure to the worker; ventilation, where air exchanges to reduce atmospheric hazards; and then equipment modifications will reduce the hazard through the design of the equipment or attachments, such as reduced vibration, dust collection system, and noise reduction, etc. Administrative controls include work practices, require the worker or the employer to do something, such as proper procedures in workplace rules and other operation-specific rules; inspection and maintenance, which is regularly inspecting tools and equipment, keeping them well maintained, removing from service and any damaged or broken items; proper housekeeping, proper supervision, and regulated areas, designing areas for lunch and break times so there's no eating, drinking, smoking, chewing tobacco or gum, or applying cosmetics in the workplace. We want to limit exposure by time and distance as well, by shortening the amount of time a worker is exposed to a task involving the hazard, and including extending the distance the hazard is from workers. So as previously mentioned, OSHA requires employers to protect their employees from workplace hazards through the use of engineering or work practice controls. However, it's not always feasible, and sometimes these controls do not provide sufficient protection. The use of personal protective equipment is required when those cases happen. Some general PPE guidelines include, but are not limited to, wearing gloves when handling chemicals or bodily fluids, wearing safety shoes, boots, or covers if hazardous substance is likely to splash, also wearing an apron, gown, or coveralls if hazardous substance is likely to splash, and then using a respirator when hazardous substance is airborne, such as tuberculosis. Wear hearing protection for loud noises, such as from equipment. Remove PPE carefully to avoid contaminating yourself, and dispose of PPE in designated containers before leaving the area. As mentioned, when engineering, work practice, and administrative controls do not provide sufficient protection, PPE must be provided to workers and employers must ensure its proper use. Employers are also required to train each worker on personal protective equipment and how to know when it's necessary, what kind is necessary, how to properly put it on, adjust it, wear it, and take it off, the limitations of the equipment, proper care, maintenance, useful life, and disposal of the equipment. To ensure the greatest possible protection for employees in the workplace, the cooperative efforts of both employers and employees will help in establishing and maintaining a safe and healthful work environment. In general, employees are responsible for properly wearing PPEs, attending training sessions on PPE, care for, clean, and maintaining PPEs, and informing a supervisor of the need to repair or replace PPEs. Eye and face protection prevents injuries from chips, sparks, or other flying particles, splashes, and harmful light radiation. Common types of eye and face PPE include safety glasses and goggles, face shields, and welding goggles and helmets. Employees can be exposed to a large number of hazards that pose dangers to their eyes and face. OSHA requires employers ensure that employees have appropriate eye and face protection if they are exposed to eye or face hazards from flying particles, molten metal, liquid chemicals, acid or caustic liquids, chemical gases or vapors, and potentially infected material or potentially harmful light radiation. Examples can be acids or other caustic liquids that might splash, blood and other potentially infectious material that may splash or spray, intense light such as that created by welding and lasers, dust and other flying particles such as sawdust and metal shavings, molten metal that might splash. General Industry 1910.133b has criteria for protective eye and face protection. Eye and face protection equipment required by this part shall meet the requirements specified in the American National Standards Institute, also known as ANSI, and devices may comply with the following: Z87.1-2003, ANSI Z87.1-1998, R-1998, and ANSI Z87.1-1989. Practice for occupational and educational eye and face protection must be referenced and incorporated by 1910.6. As mentioned, the eye and face protection must meet the standards of the ANSI Z87.1-2003. The personal protective equipment shall be distinctly marked to facilitate identification of the manufacturer. The following minimum requirements must be met by all protective devices. Protectors shall provide adequate protection against the particular hazard for which they are designed, be of safe design and construction for the work to be performed, be reasonably comfortable when worn under the designated conditions, fit snugly and not unduly interfere with the movement of the wearer, be durable, be capable of being disinfected, be easily cleanable, be distinctly marked to facilitate identification only of the manufacturer, and meet and state specifically that they meet minimally ANSI Z87.1. You can see in this slide that you have a frame, a bridge, anti-fog, impact-resistant lenses. You have to have your lens marking and side shields, as well as a top shield and adjustable arms or adjustable temples. Safety goggles are used as primary protection to shield the eyes from heat hazards. Goggles form a protective seal around the eyes, preventing objects or liquids from entering under or around the goggles. This is especially important when working with or around molten metals that may splash. When employees are exposed to high temperatures, additional protection beyond that offered by primary protectors may be required. Use safety goggles in combination with a heat-reflective face shield for several temperature exposures. Consider specific lenses, frames, and ventilation options when selecting safety goggles. Ventilated goggles allow air circulation while providing protection against airborne particles, dust, liquids, or light. Face shields are intended to protect the entire face or portions of it from impact hazards such as flying fragments, objects, large chips, and particles. When worn alone, face shields do not protect employees from impact hazards. Use face shields in combination with safety spectacles or goggles, even in the absence of dust or potential splashes, for additional protection beyond that offered by the spectacles or goggles alone. When you are using lasers, you must ensure you have laser safety goggles. They provide protection from the hazards such as flying particles, ultraviolet light, lasers, and welding. If your job involves potential hazards to your hands and arms, you'll need to protect them too. Gloves are the most common type of PPE and can protect against cuts and other items. Gloves come in a variety of styles and fabrics designed for specific situations. For instance, leather gloves are good for handling rough objects, while rubber gloves protect your hands from chemical burns. There are many types of gloves available today to protect against a wide variety of hazards. The nature of the hazard and the operation involved will affect the selection of gloves. The variety of potential occupational hand injuries makes selecting the right pair of gloves challenging. It is essential that employees use gloves specifically designed for the hazard and task found in their workplace, because gloves designed for one function may not protect against a different function, even though they may appear to be an appropriate protective device. The following are examples of some factors that may influence the selection of protective gloves for a workplace. Type of chemicals handled, nature of contact, whether it's going to be total immersion, a splash, etc., duration of contact, area requiring protection. Is it your hand only, your forearm, your entire arm? Your grip requirement. Is it going to be dry, wet, or oily? Do you need thermal protection? The size and comfort, abrasion and resistance requirements. Gloves made of leather, canvas, or metal mesh is one of the 4 groups of gloves. Another is fabric and coated fabric gloves. A third is chemical and liquid resistant gloves. And the 4th is insulating rubber gloves. If there is a risk of any injury to your entire body that your employer can't eliminate, you'll need to wear full body protection. Examples of full body protection include coveralls, vests, jackets, aprons, lab coats, surgical gowns, chemical-resistant bodysuits, and fire-resistant clothing. Wearing a safety helmet or hard hat is one of the easiest ways to protect an employee's head from injury. Hard hats can protect employees from impact and penetration hazards, as well as from electrical shock and burn hazards. Employers must ensure that their employees wear head protection if any of the following apply. Objects may fall from above and strike them on the head. They may bump their heads against fixed objects such as exposed pipes or beams. Or there's a possibility of accidental head contact with electrical hazards. ANSI Z89.1 talks about the type of head protection. Type 1 provides protection from objects falling directly on top of the helmet, but not from objects that strike the side, front, or back of the head. Type 2 provides protection from strikes to the top of the head and also provides protection from blows to the side, front, and back of the head, more suitable for workers who are not always in a standing position. There are two major classes of respirators: air purifying, which remove contaminants from the air, and atmosphere supplying, which provide clean, breathable air from an uncontaminated source. As a general rule, atmosphere supplying respirators are used for more hazardous exposures. Respirators work by either filtering particles from the air, chemically cleaning or purifying the air, or supplying clean air from an outside source. For particulate respirators, they are the simplest, least expensive, and least protective of the respirator types available. These respirators only protect against particles, for example, dust. They do not protect against chemicals, gases, or vapors, and are intended only for low hazard levels. They're commonly known as N95 filtering facepiece respirators or desk masks. They are one type of particulate respirator often used in hospitals to protect against infectious agents. Particulate respirators are air purifying respirators because they clean particles out of the air you breathe. Particulate respirators filter out dusts, fumes, and mists, are usually disposable dust masks or respirators with disposable filters, must be replaced when they become discolored, damaged, or clogged. Examples are filtering facepiece or elastometric respirators. There are chemical cartridge/gas mask respirators. Gas masks are also known as air purifying respirators because they filter or clean chemical gases out of the air as you breathe. This respirator includes a facepiece or mask and a cartridge or canister. Straps secure the facepiece to the head. The cartridge may also have a filter to remove particles. Gas masks are only effective if used with the correct cartridge or filter. These terms are often used interchangeably for a particular biological or chemical substance. Selecting the proper filter can be a complicated process. There are cartridges available that protect against more than one hazard, but there is no all-in-one cartridge that protects against all substances. It is important to know what hazards you will face in order to be certain you are choosing the right filter and cartridge. Use replaceable chemical cartridges or canisters to remove comments in the chemical cartridge and gas mask respirators. They are color-coded to help you select the right one. You may require more than one cartridge to protect against multiple hazards and contaminants. Power air purifying respirators are power air purifying respirators to use a fan that draws air through the filter to the user. They are easier to breathe through. However, they need a fully charged battery to work properly. They use the same type of filter and cartridge as other air purifying respirators. It is important to know what the hazard is and how much of it is in the air in order to select the proper filter and cartridges. Noise or unwanted sound is one of the most common health problems American workers face. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, also known as NIOSH, estimates that 30 million workers in the U.S. are exposed to hazardous noise. Exposure to high level of noise may cause hearing loss, create a physical or psychological stress, reduce productivity, interfere with communication, and contribute to accidents and injuries by making it difficult to hear warning signals. OSHA requires employers to determine if workers are exposed to excessive noise in the workplace. If so, the employers must implement feasible engineering or administrative controls to eliminate or reduce hazardous levels of noise. Where controls are not sufficient, employers must implement an effective hearing conservation program. If you have soft foam earplugs, here's how to insert earplugs properly. First, you're going to roll the earplug up into a small, thin snake with your fingers. You can use one or both hands. Then you're going to pull the top of your ear up and back with your opposite hand to straighten out your ear canal. Then, rolled up earplug should slide right in. You're going to hold the earplug with your finger, count to 20 or 30 out loud while waiting for the plug to expand and fill the ear canal. Your voice will sound muffled when the plug has made a good seal. You're going to want to check the fit when you're done. Most of the foam body of the earplug should be within your ear canal. Try cupping your hands tightly over your ears. If sounds are much more muffled with your hands in place, the earplug may not be sealing properly. Take the earplug out and try again. Employees who face possible foot or leg injuries from falling or rolling objects or from crushing or penetrating materials should wear protective footwear. Also, employees whose work involves exposure to hot substances or corrosive or poisonous material must have protective gear to cover exposed body parts, including legs and feet. Examples of situations in which an employee should wear foot and or leg protection include when heavy objects such as barrels or tools may roll onto or fall onto the employee's foot, working with sharp objects such as nails or spikes or needles that could pierce the sole or uppers of ordinary shoes, exposures to molten metal that may splash on feet or legs, working on or around hot, wet, or slippery surfaces, and working with electrical hazards present. It's important that employers show employees how to properly don PPE, which is putting on the gear. An example of donning would be identifying and gathering the proper PPE to don, ensuring the choice of gown size is correct based on your training, performing hand hygiene using hand sanitizer or washing your hands, putting on the isolation gown, tying all the ties on the gown. Assistance may be needed by another healthcare professional. Putting on a NIOSH-approved N95 filtering face piece respirator or higher. Use a face mask if a respirator is not available. Then perform hand hygiene before putting on gloves. Gloves should cover the cuff where your wrist is of the gown. Employers are also required to ensure proper doffing techniques are followed by the employee. So here's how to properly take off the gear from one example. Remove your gloves. The gloves can be removed using more than one technique. You can use your glove and glove, you can use a bird's beak, etc. Then remove your gown, untie all your ties or unsnap all the buttons. Reach up to the shoulders and carefully pull the gown down and away from the body. Perform hand hygiene. Then remove your face shield or goggles. Remove and discard the respirator or face mask if used instead of your respirator. Do not touch the front of the respirator or the face mask. Perform hand hygiene after removing the respirator and face mask and before putting it on again if your workplace is practicing reuse. Regardless of the type of PPE you use, get into the habit of routinely inspecting it and always follow the manufacturer's suggested maintenance and replacement schedules. Never use any damaged gear. Turn it into your supervisor for replacement or repair. Keep your PPE clean and store it properly after each use. Be sure to protect it from contamination, damage, dampness, and direct sunlight. By keeping it safe, it will do a better job of keeping you safe. Thank you for attending this training and have a great day.